So what if the oldest religious rituals on Earth, things that have been around for millennia, aren't actually about God at all?
Right, like what if they serve a completely different purpose?
Exactly. What if practices like, fasting, giving, and praying are actually these highly sophisticated psychological interventions, like tools designed to hack our deepest, most stubborn human flaws?
I mean, that is a massive paradigm shift. It takes the whole concept of a ritual, which we usually view as this very vertical requirement.
With something you do just to appease a higher power.
Yeah, exactly. It turns it into a horizontal intervention, a tool for completely rewiring how you interact with yourself and the people around you.
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. We are super thrilled you're here with us today because we are opening up a really fascinating piece of source material.
It's definitely a unique one.
Yeah, it's a transcript of a 2016 sermon delivered by Pastor Jerry Harper, and it's titled Giving, Praying, and Fasting. And just to be super clear right at the top for everyone listening, our mission today is not to endorse the specific theology or attempt to prove any of the divine claims Harper is making.
Right. Our goal is to look at the profound psychological architecture he's outlining here, because whether you consider yourself deeply religious or spiritual or just purely secular, the framework Harper presents offers this razor-sharp diagnostic tool for human behavior.
It really does. So we are going to unpack how Harper frames these three practices, not as, boring religious duties you mindlessly check off a list, but as radical antidotes to three very specific human problems.
Selfishness, self-confidence, and self-indulgence.
Yes. And he builds this entire premise on the Sermon on the Mount, which
Which is arguably one of the most famous and historically disruptive ethical teachings in human history.
totally. And Harper points out that in this text, Jesus laid out giving, praying, and fasting as indispensable spiritual exercises, like foundational pillars for just having a functional human life.
So let's start where he starts, which is giving.
Okay, let's unpack this,
Yeah.
because he makes this bold assertion that the primary functional purpose of giving is that it, quote, delivers us from selfishness.
Yeah, he challenges his congregation, particularly the young people who are just entering the workforce, to tithe first, to take the very first cut of their paycheck and just give it away before they do literally anything else.
And he relies on that ancient line, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
Which is a phrase doing a ton of heavy lifting in his argument.
Right.
Because it suggests that our internal affections or values, they actually follow our external investments, not the other way around.
Which is backward to how we usually think, right? Like,
Right.
we tend to think, oh, I love this cause, therefore I will give it money.
Exactly. But Harper is arguing the inverse. He's saying, give it money and your heart will be forced to care about it.
I was thinking about this mechanism, and it feels almost like a forced subscription to selflessness.
No, that's a great way to put it.
Right. Because think about how we manage our lives today. You
Mhm.
automatically pay a monthly fee for your streaming services because you value entertainment. The money just vanishes from your bank account before you even have to think about it.
Yeah, you don't even see it.
So giving off the top, structurally forcing a percentage of your resources outward, it forces a person to value something outside of themselves before their innate selfishness can even kick in.
It preempts the selfishness.
Exactly. But I do want to push back on one thing, or at least examine the way Harper frames the results of this.
Okay, yeah.
Because he mentions getting a raise at work or advancing in your career if you commit to giving. And I don't know, is there a risk here of making giving transactional? Like treating God or the universe like a cosmic vending machine, insert a dollar, receive a promotion.
What's fascinating here is, well, yeah, that transactional language is common in a lot of motivational speaking, religious or otherwise. But the deeper psychological mechanism Harper is actually tapping into is the practice of detachment.
Detachment. Okay, say more about that.
When you part with the first fruits of your labor, the resources you haven't even had the chance to mentally claim or spend in your head, yet you are actively breaking a primal biological instinct.
The instinct to stockpile.
Exactly that. I mean, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, human beings are deeply, deeply wired to hoard resources for survival. Scarcity was the baseline of human existence for millennia.
So your brain is just constantly freaking out about not having enough.
Right. Your brain's amygdala is constantly scanning for threats, and a lack of resources is perceived as a massive threat. So when you give money away first, you essentially interrupt that ancient survival software.
Wow. So you are basically sending a signal to your own nervous system that says, hey, we have enough, We aren't going to starve if we don't keep every single penny.
You force a mindset of abundance over a mindset of scarcity, so that blessing, Harper talks about it, might actually manifest as the profound psychological freedom of just not being owned by your possessions.
Right.
Because if you can give your resources away and realize you are still perfectly fine, you shift your entire cognitive focus away from self-centered consumption. You aren't buying a workplace promotion, right? You're retraining your brain to realize that your survival and your worth aren't entirely dependent on maximizing your personal stockpile.
That is so interesting. It's an active physical rebellion against the ego's demand for total resource control.
Exactly.
But, detaching from your wallet is in many ways the easy part. The real friction happens when you try to detach from your own ego, which perfectly changes the shape of Harper's next pillar.
Which brings us to prayer.
Right. So if giving is about shifting our resources outward, Harper says praying is about shifting our reliance outward, moving from our wallets to our egos.
And he claims that praying delivers us from, quote, self-confidence. He even goes as far as to call prayer a declaration of dependence.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because he goes in incredibly hard on the way most people approach this. He sharply criticizes the common habit of only praying during a crisis.
Yeah, the emergency prayer.
Right. He says we treat a higher power like an emergency intervention team. We only make the call when the house is literally on fire, rather than spending time daily recognizing our own inherent helplessness without that connection.
It's like only calling a friend when you need help moving a couch.
Yes,
Yeah.
perfect analogy. You ignore them all year, and then suddenly you're like, hey man, can you help me lift this sofa?
Right, which isn't a real relationship.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I want to pause on this phrase, disease of self-confidence, because in modern culture, self-confidence is the absolute pinnacle of human development.
It's what we strive for.
I mean, we read books, we take weekend seminars entirely dedicated to building self-confidence. We tell our kids it's the key to success. So why on earth is Harper standing at a pulpit diagnosing self-confidence as a disease?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the clash makes total sense when you understand the worldview Harper is presenting. Because in this framework, what we call self-confidence often mutates into an illusion of omnipotence.
An illusion of control.
Exactly. Extreme self-reliance is deeply isolating. It creates this mirage that we are the sole authors of our destiny, that we are steering the ship, controlling the weather, and managing the entire ocean all by ourselves.
Which works perfectly fine until you hit a storm you can't manage.
Right. An illness, an economic collapse, a sudden loss.
Yeah.
When that illusion of control shatters, if your entire psychological foundation is built solely on your own self-confidence, the collapse is absolutely devastating.
Wow.
So true strength, in Harper's reading of these ancient texts, paradoxically comes from acknowledging your extreme limitations up front. He uses a brilliant phrase to encapsulate this. He says, prayer is not preparation for the battle. Prayer is the battle.
Prayer is the battle. That is a complete inversion of how we normally process preparation.
It really is.
You aren't doing this ritual to get ready for the hard thing. The act of voluntarily humbling yourself, is the hard thing.
It's the daily active fight against the human ego. The ego that constantly whispers, I can do it myself. I am the center of the universe. I don't need anyone. Because the fortress of I've got this often turns out to be a prison of isolation.
Yeah, that's powerful.
Engaging in a declaration of dependence forces a person to remain tethered to reality, acknowledging that they are a small part of a much larger, uncontrollable system.
So we have giving as a tool to dismantle the hoarding instinct and praying as a tool to dismantle the illusion of control.
Right.
But there is a glaring loophole here. What happens when someone executes the mechanics perfectly? Like they automate their charitable giving, they do their daily prayer, they check all the boxes of being a quote-unquote good person, but their actual day-to-day behavior remains incredibly toxic.
Ah, the hypocrite problem.
Yeah.
This is a behavioral paradox that has existed for as long as human institutions have existed, and it leads directly into Harper's harshest critique.
It really does. Which brings us to the third pillar, fasting. Harper starts by stating that fasting delivers us from self-indulgence. But then he immediately pivots away from, the modern idea of fasting as just some intermittent fasting health trend.
Right. He's not talking about skipping breakfast for your metabolism.
No. He dives into this fiery reading of the ancient biblical book of Isaiah, chapter 58. And in this specific passage, God is actively, aggressively rejecting the fasting of his people.
It's a striking and honestly incredibly uncomfortable passage because the people in the text are complaining. They're saying, hey, we fasted, we humbled ourselves, we did the ritual exactly as prescribed. Why haven't you noticed? Why aren't we getting the results?
And the response they get is brutal. Harper explains that the ritual is rejected because on the exact same day they are fasting, they are doing whatever they please to the people around them.
They're exploiting their workers.
Exactly. They're getting into bitter quarrels. They're literally getting into fistfights in the streets. And Harper uses this to call out the hypocrisy of wanting a spiritual jolt on a Sunday, but living ruthlessly Monday through Saturday.
It's the ultimate display of cognitive dissonance. They're attempting to use a spiritual ritual to mask deep ethical corruption.
He actually quotes an essay by a writer named Syrian Jones to illustrate what this looks like in a modern setting.
Oh, the executive story.
Yeah. Jones writes about a Christian corporate executive who lays off 1,000 employees in the morning without a single qualm, purely to bump up the quarterly profit margins. But then, that exact same night, this executive feels terribly, overwhelmingly guilty about having a few too many drinks at dinner.
The executive has completely lost the plot. His moral compass is so distorted that he prioritizes personal aesthetic purity, like his own drinking habits, over actual systemic justice for 1,000 people's livelihoods.
It's like drinking a triple shot espresso on Sunday morning and expecting it to somehow make up for actively poisoning yourself the rest of the week.
That's exactly it.
They're using a superficial ritual to launder their ethical corruption. So how does Isaiah 58 redefine what a real fast actually is?
Yeah.
Because it sounds far more like an activist manifesto than a guide for a religious ritual.
Isaiah fundamentally redefines the chosen fast. The text explicitly states that a true fast is not about bowing your head or skipping a meal to look miserable. It is about active social justice.
Wow.
It defines the fast as loosing the chains of injustice, setting the oppressed free, sharing your food with the hungry, and providing shelter for the poor wanderer.
That is a staggering shift in definition. It moves fasting from the state of private deprivation to a state of public provision.
Harper is demonstrating how empty rituals and self-serving behaviors cannot cover up idolatry. And idolatry in this modern translation is simply the worship of our own comfort, our own profit, and our own power.
Right. Only sacrificial acts of love and justice can actually bring about healing. You simply cannot starve your way out of treating people terribly. So if a true fast isn't just about skipping lunch to get a temporary spiritual high, what does an effective transformative fast actually look like in everyday practice? Because Harper gives a list of 9 purposes for fasting in his sermon, right?
Right. Things like breaking addictions, solving complex problems, physical healing, gaining mental clarity.
But he doesn't just list them. He provides some deeply unconventional examples of how this is achieved.
He shares 2 distinct anecdotes that move the concept of fasting out of the ancient world and into very practical psychological applications.
Let's look at the first one, which focuses on the personal internal landscape. It's from an author named Catherine Marshall.
Yeah.
And she decided to engage in what she called a fast from criticism.
A fast from criticism.
Yeah, her vow was simple. For one entire 24-hour period, she would not criticize anybody about anything.
Which is a rule that sounds incredibly simple until you actually try to execute it.
Oh, I would fail in the first 10 minutes.
Most people would. And the immediate result she documented wasn't a sudden feeling of holiness or peace. It was a feeling of profound emptiness.
Yeah, she said she felt a massive void, almost like her personality had been wiped out. During lunch with her family, she just sat there silently. She realized she literally had nothing to contribute to the conversation if she wasn't criticizing the government or the justice system or her neighbors.
And the kicker is that no one even missed her comments.
No one missed them. But by the mid-afternoon, as she sat with that extreme discomfort, something shifted. She experienced this massive rush of joy and a flow of creative ideas she hadn't felt in years. She had this epiphany that her hypercritical nature hadn't fixed a single systemic issue she complained about. It had only served to stifle her own mind.
That is a brilliant psychological observation, and it perfectly illustrates the mechanism behind Harper's 9 purposes for fasting.
So what does this all mean? Because a fast from criticism sounds like a mental detox. Can the psychological friction of an unconventional fast, like giving up complaining or giving up sarcasm or doom scrolling, actually be significantly more difficult and maybe more effective than just giving up a meal?
This raises an important question because it comes down to understanding what a fast fundamentally is at a neurobiological level. Whether you are withholding food, withholding criticism, or putting your smartphone in a lockbox for the weekend, the mechanism of a fast is about creating a deliberate void.
A deliberate void.
Yes. Human beings constantly use habits to self-medicate, to regulate our nervous systems, and basically to fill the silence. In Catherine Marshall's case, criticism was her dopamine hit.
Oh, wow.
It was a defense mechanism that made her feel engaged, in control, and intellectually superior. When you remove a deeply ingrained habit like that, you are immediately forced to confront the raw emotions, the anxieties, or the profound insecurities that the habit was masking.
So it's like you're taking away the numbing agent.
Precisely. When Marshall removed the numbing agent of criticism, she went through a localized withdrawal. She felt empty. But because she committed to the fast, she had to sit with that uncomfortable void.
And then the brain resets.
Yes. When you sit with the void long enough, your baseline dopamine receptors begin to reset. The brain, no longer overwhelmed by the cheap, constant hits of the bad habit, can finally pivot back to a baseline of creativity, joy, and clarity. The fast creates the space for the transformation Harper promises, because you simply cannot fill a cup that is already overflowing with your own coping mechanisms.
That makes so much sense. We use our self-indulgence to avoid looking at what is actually broken inside of us.
Exactly.
And then Harper shares a second anecdote, which shifts this concept from a personal detox to a massive collective scale. He talks about an event at Liberty University back in 1985.
A fascinating case study in collective action.
Yeah, over 5,000 students at the university engaged in a collective fast for their dean of students, Vernon Brewer, because he had been diagnosed with cancer and was given only 6 months to live. Think about the logistics of that 5,000 people stepping into that deliberate void together, enduring physical hunger, to focus entirely on one man's survival.
And Harper notes that 12 years later, Brewer was still alive.
Right. And Harper uses this story to argue that fasting isn't just about personal self-improvement or breaking a bad habit. It is a mechanism for releasing immense spiritual power to break heavy burdens.
And while the theological interpretation of that outcome obviously focuses on divine intervention, the psychological and sociological impacts of the event are equally staggering.
How so?
Because the function of the fast on a communal level is a radical alignment of human intention. It strips away the self-indulgence and the trivial distractions of everyday life for an entire community.
It creates a singular, unified focus.
Exactly. When 5,000 people collectively agree to deny their most basic biological urge, hunger, in order to focus their empathy and their support on a singular, urgent reality, the psychological environment completely changes. It is the ultimate anti-selfishness, anti-self-confidence, anti-self-indulgence act.
Which brings the entire framework full circle.
It really does. It perfectly ties Harper's 3 pillars together into a cohesive system for living.
Let's quickly recap the journey we've been on with this incredible source material. Pastor Harper presents a blueprint where giving is intentionally designed to defeat our innate biological selfishness.
Right.
Praying is the daily battle to defeat our isolating self-reliance. And fasting is the tool to defeat our self-indulgence, forcing us to confront the things we use to numb ourselves.
And the ultimate goal of combining all 3 isn't to perform empty rituals so we can feel morally superior. The goal is coherence. It is to radically align Sunday's stated beliefs with Monday's lived reality.
It's the cure for the hypocrite problem. It ensures that your internal state actually matches your external actions. These ancient rituals, when understood as psychological tools, are about deliberately dismantling the worst parts of our human nature so that empathy, clarity, and justice can grow in the void they leave behind.
They are mechanisms for unlearning the behaviors that isolate us from each other.
I love that phrasing, unlearning our isolation. Well, we have covered a tremendous amount of ground today, but we always want to leave you, our listener, with a new angle to consider, something to chew on that takes this ancient framework and applies it directly to the modern world you live in right now.
Right, taking the theory and testing it against our current environment.
Exactly. So here is our final thought for you. Consider for a moment the modern attention economy. The social media algorithms, the targeted ads, the endless feeds on the supercomputers we carry in our pockets. That entire trillion-dollar infrastructure is fundamentally built to monetize our self-indulgence and artificially inflate our egos.
The algorithms are literally designed to feed the exact human flaws Harper says we need to be fighting against.
Exactly. So if you were to do a 24-hour fast, starting right now, not from food, but from your most ingrained daily habit, like complaining, needing to be right, or doom scrolling what uncomfortable truths or hidden dependencies, would that sudden void reveal about you?
It's a heavy question. It forces you to look at how much of your daily behavior is being driven by a system designed to keep you indulged and isolated.
How do you build a defense against an algorithm that knows exactly how to feed your ego? It's definitely a question worth exploring on your own. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and we will catch you next time.